Welcome to Civic Pulse, where we explore the issues shaping our communities with your host, Rabbi Yaacov Behrman.
Today we have a special guest, Assembly Member Brian Cunningham from the 43rd Assembly District, which includes Crown Heights. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on, Yaakov. I want to hear that song again.
I'll tell you something. When I started this podcast, I was looking for a song. And my wife's grandfather, Eli Lipsker, was a very famous musician and composer in Chabad. He would play in front of the Rebbe. And I figured if I steal his music, my wife's grandmother's not going to sue me.
Exactly. It's amazing.
He was playing that music, yeah.
That's amazing. It reminds me of the sounds of Israel.
Thank you. So, Brian, we're living in such a crazy time in the world, a historic time. And you were chosen to be an assembly member in a district which is a very diverse district, but also with a very large Jewish community. And after October 7th, the world changed for Jews. And I wanted to know your thoughts on how you see things today.
Well, I think you started it off with the right sentiment in terms of talking about, for such a time as this, I believe in the book of Esther, which is shared both in the Bible and in the Torah. They talk about what leadership looks like in these moments. And I really believe that my entire life prepared me for this moment, growing up in a community like Flatbush and Crown Heights and being able to live among both the Black American community and see the oppression and struggles of our people, and also living in Crown Heights with the Jewish community and seeing their oppression and struggles. I think there's an interconnected bond that connects us both together. And I think sometimes what happens is we focus more on the differences that look different. So whether we worship a different God or pray to a different God or go to a different place, I think what connects us is this idea of resilience. And I think what we've seen after October 7th is a true resilience of the Jewish people. And I'm just so happy to represent the community and to share some of the pains, but also the joy and resistance and resilience of the community as well. So I'm looking forward to dancing again as we talk about after October 7th.
Thank you. I understand you're going to Israel in the near future.
Yeah, I'm going back for my fourth trip to Israel. I went there the last time in December, which was nice and cool. And I'm going back in July, which should be very, very warm. But looking forward, it's my first time returning to the region since October 7th. I know that I had a good friend, Congressman Dan Goldman, who I spoke to at the time when he was actually there on October 7th. This thing was taken off, and I was just nervous for him. Just glad that Dan and his family returned safely. Glad that some of the hostages are coming home, but I deeply mourn for so many that have lost their lives, and mourn that we even have to be at this place where we have such a rift and divide and people picking sides. There's nothing more important in human life than making sure that all that were taken are returned home safely.
You know, as a Jew living in New York, one of the things that I struggled with, I can't understand, is why after October 7th did we see an increase in anti-Semitism on college campus across the world, across the United States. I mean, this week they had a celebration in Manhattan where they were celebrating the life of Nasrallah, who killed many, many Americans, not just Jews, not just Israelis. And I'm wondering, why do you think that instead of compassion, instead of sort of understanding and empathy, we saw an increase in anti-Semitism after October 7th and before Israel went into Gaza, immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're living, as you said, in some very strange and complex times. And I think while social media has helped in so many ways to spread information, it's also been a big factor in disinformation and spreading hate. We've seen hate crimes on the rise throughout all communities, but specifically in the Jewish community recently. And I think social media plays a big factor. I think what we need to do is get back to connecting with people. Like I said, growing up in this community, walking down Crown and Carroll and Nostrand Avenue and seeing the vibrancy of both a Black community and the Jewish community have lived together in peace. Outside of 1992, we had the big conflict here in this community. We figured out a way to find peace and to move forward. I hope that for every community, particularly those in Israel back home.
Thank you so much. What do you see as an assembly member and fighting every day for Crown Heights in your district and for New York? What do you see the real issue today in New York State? The real issue in New York is the same issue I think facing the entire country, but more so here is this expensive cost of living. When you talk about the cost of housing, the cost of food, and the cost of childcare, these things aren't lost on me at all as an assembly member. It's the kind of things that I hear about in my district all the time, that you have people who want to continue to raise their families here in New York City, specifically in Crown Heights, specifically in Flatbush, who can no longer afford to do so because the cost of a one bedroom is almost $3,000. So when you talk about a family of 3 or 4 or even more,
you're talking about $6,000-$7,000 to rent an apartment, and that is really, really expensive. Couple that with what it costs now to purchase a home in this community if you haven't purchased already. You're looking at $1.5 million for a starter home, which means
You let me know where. There's no homes for $1.5 million.
it's crazy, right?
Right?
But 3.5 down, even on 1.5 million for a family who's paying $3,000 already a month for rent. It's really a hard proposition. So on the state level right now, we're really working on a couple of pieces of legislation that would help create more housing. One of the bills that I'm happy to sponsor in the state assembly is a bill called a faith-based affordable housing bill, which would help preserve the existing religious institution, but also help build some housing and allow the air rights for that housing to be developed. We're also looking at moving around the AMI configuration. As you know, the AMI is average and medium income, and in New York City, what they take is the 5 boroughs, Westchester and Long Island, and call it one AMI. That's what the federal government does. What I propose is a thing called CMI, which would say community medium income. So if you live in a community, what is the medium income in that community? And every dollar that's raised from the state to help build housing is focused on getting people who live in those communities their medium income so that they can live in those houses.
All right, so you mentioned AMI. So I was on the community board for 10 years. I recently resigned.
That's unfortunate.
My life's a lot happier. But for those that are listening and don't fully understand, so even something you have affordable housing projects that go up all around New York, and the way AMI is today, and in order for a developer to build, you can only sort of choose a section. He has different options. He could choose an option how he's going to build. He's going to offer apartments at affordable prices. And in many cases, based on the AMI and the percentage of the AMI, a apartment which is affordable ends up being quite expensive.
Yeah.
And what can we do really to make this affordable housing truly affordable for the community?
Yeah, I think, again, it goes back to making sure that these average medium incomes reflect not those of the 5 boroughs or Westchester or Long Island. It really has to be laser focused on what do people, particularly in Community Board 9, make as an average salary. And if we focus on building housing around the medium income for the community and not for New York City, Westchester, and Long Island, we can get people that actually live in these communities to actually be able to qualify for these homes. We worked with a couple of housing organizations to also help people fill out the application. A lot of this goes through the housing lottery process. I personally don't believe that housing or schools or anything of that nature should be left to chance or choice, right? So I really feel like we need to actually just drill down and make sure that we work with folks in communities to make sure those incomes reflect the people that actually live in those houses.
So does Congress or the Senate have to play a role here? Does the state have the power to change the AMIs?
Well, the state doesn't have the power to change the federal AMIs. That is something that Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand are currently carrying in the United States Here on the state level, what we're saying, or what my bill does, it says that, and I'm doing that with Senator Robert Jackson from Manhattan. So you see, this is a problem both in Brooklyn and Manhattan and all 5 boroughs, is that I'm saying that if the state's going to give money and subsidies to a housing project to be developed, that development should really benefit the people in the community that we're fighting for. It shouldn't benefit people that are going to come in that make more money and push out other folks. We enjoy our community because of its diversity. We enjoy it because in Flatbush, you can get a beef patty, and over here, you can get some challah, right? So it's really important that we make sure we keep the community together, and we do that by having diversity, not just one set of people living who have the resource to live anywhere.
Thank you. One of the issues facing New York is mental health. And so much of the crime that we see locally and across the city has a mental health component. We had a story in Crown Heights a few weeks ago where somebody was walking on Sabbath, on Saturday, with his child, and somebody tried to cut off his ear. And it turns out this person afterwards, when they were arresting him, shouted things like, "You killed my brethren in Gaza, I'm going to kill Jews, bring me a Jew." And I understand that the grand jury indicted this person as a hate crime, but at some point between the arrest and the indictment, he was hospitalized for I don't know if it was drugs or mental health. And it's a big challenge. And it doesn't seem like the city and state have enough resources or focusing enough resources to handle this mental health challenge.
Well, let me say this. Governor Hochul has been very clear from 2 years ago when she put out her State of the State. and invested over $1 billion in mental health, that this was going to be a huge focus for this administration, and a huge focus for the state legislator. What we have not seen, and what happened is, let's give it full context. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, what we saw was a lot of mental health beds that had to be turned over into COVID beds. And as a result of that, a lot of people were released from hospitals without being brought back into the hospitals. Obviously, if people aren't on their medication and aren't on their drugs and aren't being recommitted to those hospitals, we don't have the beds for them, they're not getting the services they need. And I think that's something that we really have to work on, finding some balance and getting people who need the help, support, and medication, the services they need, and also provide those beds so folks can get the wellness care they need. Short of that, we're going to have a lot of people in the street who aren't at their best, not because they don't want to be their best person, but they cannot be their best person without the support they need. So I know that in this budget, again, the governor and the state legislator has proposed additional resources to make sure that people get the treatment they need. And we're also looking at how do we get people who are currently in need of support, the supports they need without violating their human rights, but also making sure we protect people who are just walking on the street on Sabbath or walking out of a church on Sunday or on a train from being hurt or harmed.
Thank you. I mean, in this particular case, there's a hate crime. I understand that the Brooklyn DA is taking it all the way. The person's facing, felonies.
Yeah. But hate is also a mental illness. Hate, and we have to get to the root cause of what creates that and hysteria. And again, going back to the social media and knowing that some people, what people are saying on social media and animating, and some of these protests we're seeing are giving life to people who aren't their best selves. So you're putting gasoline on top of a fire that's literally creating chaos in our cities and throughout our state.
I think that mental health could play a role, that somebody who's struggling with mental health, it's more likely that they could be caught up in there's anti-Semitic rhetoric, they could fall for it. I think there's also evil in the world. There are people that are evil and hate and commit acts of hate. And
absolutely,
like we saw now. I'm sure you're following. I know you've met the hostage families, and
yes,
you've met victims of October 7th, and the worldwide Jewish community now is in mourning. We got back to Biba's family, and the funeral was this week.
Yeah,
and it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the world.
And let me just be very clear. What happened on October 7th should have never happened. And the response since October 7th has been one that has shaken my core to see so much hate. And anyone who commits an act of hate should be prosecuted to the highest degree of the law. And we also need to find a way back to unity, particularly in this community. I think we've been able to do so for a very long time. And again, because of what happened on October 7th, there's so much mistrust and so much division that we have to try to figure out how to tie us back together and find the commonality, which is our humanity.
Thank you. You mentioned preserving religious institutions. So I don't know, did you read the COL Live magazine's recent article about the Kingsbrook Synagogue? And just to give some background for the listeners, in the 1920s, the Jewish community of Brooklyn built a hospital. The reason why they built that hospital is because there was anti-Semitism at Kings County, and doctors and patients weren't welcome. So they built a Jewish hospital. And then I think it was in 1928 they built a synagogue on that hospital. In the 1950s, they built a standalone building that was a synagogue for many, many years. Until 2020, it was an active synagogue. You even see in 1991, the leadership of the hospital came by the Lubavitcher Rebbe for a blessing, and you could see it looks like your local Jewish nonprofit. I'm saying everybody there was a member of the Jewish community, a leader in the Jewish community. It was a Jewish institution. And since COVID, the synagogue has been locked out. And there was, for those that want to read the article, it's on COL Live. But the synagogue is claiming that we have a right to the synagogue. We've been here 100 years. And the founders of this institution put aside funding and built the synagogue and they wanted it to be preserved. And who has the right to not allow us in or throw us out or take the synagogue away from us?
Yeah. No, I did get a chance to read this article briefly, and obviously share some concerns about what is alleged in the article. Definitely feel like there is a need for due process, and obviously any synagogue, church, or mosque that has been in existence for a long period of time deserves a process in which they can return. I am not familiar with all the legalities of it, and I look forward to working with my colleagues, both in the state government and the Attorney General, to get to the bottom of this. I know that in 2020, when this happened, I was not in office as the Assembly member, and the governor was not elected yet as governor. So I think there is a way that we can come to the table and try to figure out what is the right approach moving forward to give due process to the people involved.
Thank you. It's, I think, a great answer. We just had an election.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your district.
Yeah.
So in 2020, about 4,200 members of we call it the Nash community, the local civic community, came out to vote. In 2024, we had 5,783 people come out to vote, really 84.
It's incredible.
There was a woman who was 101 years old who voted in person, and they did not count her vote because there was a spelling mistake between a W and an O or something. And they have since fixed that. But we had about 57. I counted in my database, in the Jewish Future Alliance database, we had 5,783 voters, which is a huge increase.
Yeah.
From those voters, there were 1,200 newly registered. And I think there were like 100 who haven't voted since 2013 that voted now for the first time. Like a tremendous,
incredible.
It's a tremendous awakening.
Yeah.
But looking through that list, we have the ability to look at the list and study that list because we have the names of everybody in the community and we have their voter registration number. We could match it up against who voted. And to be clear, who you voted for is not public record.
Yeah.
That's private. But whether you voted is public. So we matched it up, and I found there are things that looked off. Just, somebody who, I'll give an example, somebody who died 40 years ago was listed as he voted. That's all, right? I know him. He's a famous personality in the community. He's been dead 40 years, right? So I called up the son, and I'm like, are you sitting? He says, I'm sitting. I said, are you ready for this? He said, what? Your dad's voting again. He says, not possible. I said, what do you mean? He says, he's dead 40 years. I said, but he's voting. I looked at the list again, and I realized that he has a son named after his dad with the same name. When his son went to vote, they counted it as his dad's vote.
Got it.
But that's still a problem.
No, it's still a problem. And obviously, let me say thank you to you and your team for all the work you've done on making sure that, we have people registered to vote and that we're actually getting people to the polls to vote. If it had not been for this community coming out in the margin they did out in 2022, I probably wouldn't be sitting here as your assembly member. So I just want to give a huge shout out to the community and to
every voter.
To every voter, right? And that's whether you voted for me or you voted for someone else. I got 99.6% of the votes. I'm looking for those 0.4 people that didn't vote for me. But in all seriousness, I am excited about the fact that our community is voting. We have the 4th largest voter turnout in all of Brooklyn. That's behind Assemblymember Joanne Simon, behind Assemblymember Bobby Carroll, behind Farah Soufant in our districts. That means a lot, particularly when you talk about national elections and local elections and who's going to tip the balance. Central Brooklyn is a powerhouse at the table that people know they have to pay attention to. As a result of that, you've seen resources come in this community that you've never seen before in terms of capital and expense money and other resources coming in. In terms of the voter hiccups that we're still seeing at the polls, obviously, what we know needs to happen is better training for our poll workers in terms of being able to identify and read the names correctly and adequately count those ballots. But we've come a very far way, both in terms of the people voting and the technology we're using to vote. And I think there's still advances being made, and I'm looking forward to continue to work with my colleagues. I know Senator Gonzalez is now the new chair of elections in the state Senate. And Latrice Walker, who's just down the street from us, is also our elections chair. So there's still some work to be done, but clearly a lot of progress has happened since the numbers are so big.
I want to talk about some of that work because I took a look at the broader list because there was another person, I'm not going to mention your name, who was dead about 5 years who voted too, and I couldn't figure out how they voted. It's great that people are voting again, but
voting from the grave.
Voting from the grave. It's not widespread, to be clear, but it's there. So I looked at the list and I found that there was somebody born in 1850 that voted for president. The person would be 174 years old. There was somebody born in 1907 who voted, and according to Google, the oldest person alive was born in 1908. So I reached out, and there were, I don't remember how many, 40 people born in 1850, but a lot of people over 100. In Crown Heights, in the Jewish community, the oldest person registered to vote who's still active is Menucha Lazarov. I think she would be 124, if I remember correctly, and obviously she's not voting. But in terms of actual voting, I found somebody who would be 174 who voted, and somebody who would be 117 who voted. So I reached out to the Board of Elections, and I gave them the information, the voter ID, and they said maybe it's a typo. And they got back to me that they think it is a typo and that they have some system that if you don't put the date of when you registered, they put you back to 1850. I'm not really sure. So my first question is, if you don't put a date, and I'm sorry, your birth date, why are you even registered? Like, that's number one.
Yeah.
Something doesn't. And they said that the 1907, they think it should have been maybe 1957. They're not sure. That may be a mistake too. But my question is, if you're 174 years old, there's no way you could be voting. We can agree on that?
No, we can agree.
So why is there no system in place that triggers some alert or something that after a certain amount of time, you want to make it 120?
Yeah.
My father used to say always, you should live to 118. They would ask him, why 118, why not 120? He said, the last 2 years are always the worst. whatever the age is, why is there how can somebody walk in, a grandson, and vote for their grandfather and the name of their grandfather? This was a mistake.
Yeah.
Who died 40 years ago.
Look,
why is there nothing in place? These seem to be like, I'm not talking about like, let's take aside the partisan politics, whether we need voter ID, whether we don't need voter ID.
Yeah.
But that there are people there in our district, there's dozens of people on the list that are listed as being over 150 years old.
Yeah.
What's wrong?
So look, I think we've made a lot of progress in this state in terms of coming from last to first in terms of voter participation. What I think we still need to do is use technology systems, take these stories and go back and legislate. Sometimes what happens is there are 14,000 bills introduced every year in the state legislature. About 1,200 pass both houses, and a few are signed by the governor into law. It could be that some of these bills that are written have not yet come up for a vote in committee to help modernize the elections and have not yet reached the governor's desk. But I believe that with this story you shared with me, I'll definitely do some hard looking and see what we can do from that perspective, working with our election chairs in both houses to figure out if we can find some comprehensive election reforms that would help close this gap to make sure that we don't have these discrepancies in who might have voted, and the system kind of saying that 120, 118, whatever you want to say, you've checked out probably, and you probably aren't interested in who's going to be the next president or the next assembly person.
Or unless you may be interested, but you're not from this world.
You certainly shouldn't run.
You mentioned the governor. I read in the news, the news is reporting this week that you may be, you're a candidate for lieutenant governor. Let's close with that. Any thoughts on that?
Look, if Crown Heights is a part of this job description and representing Crown Heights, I want all in. But all seriousness, it's been an honor to represent the 43rd Assembly District, and I enjoy serving people. And obviously, as somebody who represents people locally, there's always an appetite to see what you can do, whether that be borough-wide or statewide. I have not closed the door on any options, but right now I'm just really happy to have been reelected to the State Assembly and working hard for the people of the 43rd District.
I want to say Crown Heights is rooting for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you
so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.